Welcome to Excel and Business Math video number 35. Hey, in this video, we got to talk about the amazing VLOOKUP function with the MAX function to calculate federal income tax payroll deductions. Now, we'll talk about what a federal income tax withholding deduction is. We'll see how to do the calculation longhand. We'll see how to do it with VLOOKUP and MAX. And then we'll make the calculation on a full payroll table. Now, let's start off by going over to the sheet Fed Income Tax. Federal Income Tax Withholdings. It's called withholdings because guess what? Federal income taxes have to be collected by the employer. They have to withhold some money and then send it to the federal government on behalf of the employees. Now, federal income taxes go by the concept of pay as you go. That means that as you make money throughout the year, you have to pay your income taxes. Now, when we calculate a federal income tax withholding, it's only an estimate. We're not sure exactly how much money we're going to make by the end of the year. We don't know if we'll get a raise, whether we'll lose our job, get a different job, whether we'll be sick. So all the calculations are an estimate. Now, every employee has to fill out a W-4. That's like this form down here. And on that form, you have to claim whether you're single or married, because whether you're single or married will determine a different tax table for us to look up how much tax we have to pay. Also, we have to claim number of allowances. The more allowances we have, the more of our earnings are not taxed. And allowances can be thought of as the number of people who you support. One allowance equals one personal allowance or an allowance for a dependent. So the more allowances we have, the more we'll have to subtract from gross pay to get actual taxable pay. Now, there's a few different ways we can estimate our federal income tax withholdings. There's the wage bracket method and the percentage method. And these methods are defined by the Internal Revenue Service Publication 15, Circular E. Now, the one we're going to use is the percentage method. So we want to go over to the sheet Percentage Method. Now, on this sheet, there's a link at the top, and I'm going to click it and go to the IRS site. This, I just downloaded. It just is not even a month old, these tax tables. Here's the table we're going to use to determine what is the allowance. For us, we're only doing weekly, but companies could pay biweekly, semi-monthly, monthly, quarterly, and so on. For us, every time someone claims one allowance, we subtract $79.80 from their gross pay. That means we reduce gross pay before we make our tax calculation. Now, if we scroll further down, here are the tables where we get our tax rates. Now, notice this, weekly payroll table. And then within this weekly payroll table, there's a table with tax rates for single persons and married. Down here, there's a biweekly table. Down here, semi-monthly. All sorts of different tables. So whatever business you work for, you have to figure out what your pay period is. Our pay period that we're going to assume is weekly. Now, these tables are fine, but they're created by the IRS, and they're not very easy to use for making calculations. So I went ahead and downloaded these. And back over here, we can see here's the lower limit. Here's the upper limit. That means for our taxable pay, we have to look up and see which category we fit into. So if we're in this category right here, we simply use the tax rule from this column. Now, what that means is if we had $900 taxable pay, we would take the $85.62. That's all of the tax from the previous categories. So we take that, add it to the employee's taxable pay, $900. We'd have to subtract the $815, which is the upper limit from the previous category. And it also represents all of the earnings taxed so far. So we do that subtraction. And then we multiply by the 22% for this category. Now notice that calculation right there is the same calculation we did for variable commission and piecework back in video number 33. So we will be able to use the same formulas we did in video 33 to make our income tax withholding calculations. Now this table right here is for marital status, single, and weekly pay period. Down here, this table is for marital status, married, and weekly pay period. Now, depending on the employee's status, either single or married, we're going to have to pick the right lookup table because the numbers are totally different in each. Now, this table up here allows us to pick a particular payroll period and then pick the amount for one allowance. Because all of our employees get paid weekly, we're always going to be using $79.80 for one allowance. All right, now we need to go see how to use these tables and calculate our federal income tax withholding deduction. I want to go over to the sheet PM for percentage method, single weekly. Now on this sheet we have our single allowance table, but we're just going to be using the 7980. Over here we have the correct lookup table for single marital status and weekly payroll period. We'll make our calculations here longhand, and then we'll create an automatic method using VLOOKUP in the MAX function. And here's our employee, Ada Callie, gets paid weekly. There's the gross 1,900, marital status single, and there's the number of withholdings, 2. Now, if we're going to do it longhand, the first thing we have to calculate is total allowance. This is the amount of earnings that are not taxed. To do that, we simply say, hey, there's the claimed allowances, 2 of them, times the amount they allow for each allowance. When I enter, that's the amount for Ada that's not taxed. Now, taxable pay, that's the amount that we need to calculate that will allow us to look up, find the right category, and then figure out what our rule is for calculating Fed income tax. Taxable pay equals, well, there's the whole gross minus the amount that the government is not going to tax our total allowance, and enter. Now we can calculate our federal income tax. With our taxable pay, we can look through and find out what category. That number fits between this lower and upper limit. If we were thinking like the VLOOKUP function does, then we'd look at this, race through the first column, find the first number bigger, jump back, and that would tell us that this is the correct category. So we can read this rule and build our income tax formula. Equal sign. It looks like it says 271.08. That's the cumulative tax from all the previous categories. To that, I have to add in parentheses. It says employee taxable pay. There it is, that amount right there. From that, I subtract the upper limit from the previous category. Then I close parentheses, times, and I get the tax rate. So once I figure out the row, that's the hard part. Read the rule, click on the cells, and when I hit enter, that's the federal income tax withholding. That's the amount that we would deduct from the employee's paycheck. Now, the problem with that method, of course, is if I change this amount here, that number is not correct. Control Z. The other problem is if you have to do this formula over and over for many employees, it takes too long, it's prone to errors. So let's see how to do this the automatic way. We want a formula for taxable pay and for income tax that will calculate correctly no matter what the gross pay is. Well, we can calculate taxable pay easy enough. It's simply the gross pay, and then in our formula, we'll have to subtract whatever the allowances are times the allowance amount. So for taxable pay equals gross pay minus number of allowances times the amount of allowance for our weekly time period, and enter. That is the correct amount. Now, there's a problem with the formula as it sits right there. And the problem comes from if gross pay is less than the total allowances, then that becomes negative and the subsequent formula will not work. For example, if I change Ada's gross pay to 55, she only came in for a few hours on a day. Wow, that's not going to work. Now, instead of building an if function to test if this is less than the total allowances, guess what? Let's be smart here. That's negative. What do I really want there? I want 0 because the taxable pay is 0. Well, which number is bigger, this negative number or 0? Well, of course, 0 is bigger. Now, I'm going to Control Z and ask the same question right now. Which number is bigger, that taxable pay or 0? Well, the taxable pay is. So that's an alternative to building an if here. I can simply say F2, please give me the bigger number between whatever that formula calculates and 0. And the function that finds the biggest value or the maximum value is the max function, tab. So the max function is an aggregate function. Like we've seen so many aggregate functions before, we're allowed to put multiple items in. And it will do whatever aggregate calculation the function does. In our case, calculate the max. So at the end, I'm going to comma 0. And now max will always find the biggest number between whatever that calculates to. And it has 3 possibilities. It can be negative 0 or positive. So it will find the max between that and 0. And that's our formula for taxable pay. So when I enter this, now if I put 55, well, these formulas don't work, but that's calculating perfectly. Now I'm going to Control Z. So now we have taxable pay. Federal income tax. Well, we did this formula, video 33. I want to come back up here, F2, and notice, what are we doing here? Well, if we have that value right there, 1,740, taxable pay as our lookup value, what is J15? J15 is VLOOKUP, looking up that value and getting the value from the 5th column. What is that value? Well, that's just the taxable pay. How about that one, I15? Well, it's VLOOKUP. Please go get the item from the 4th column. And finally, H15, that's VLOOKUP. Go get the item from the 3rd column. So really, it's the same formula we did a couple different times back in video 33. Now, there's a few ways we could build this formula. And in video 33, we saw how we put multiple pieces of the formulas in separate cells. And once we got that all working, we copied and pasted and mashed it all together in a single cell. This video, I'm going to show you a slightly different way. We're still going to rely on our note over here, just like we did in video 33. VLOOKUP 5 plus taxable pay minus VLOOKUP 4, that's got to be in parentheses, times VLOOKUP 3. Then after we do that, we'll worry about the round. All right, so you ready? Equals VL tab. The lookup value when we're doing federal income tax is taxable pay, comma, the table. First column's always got to be sorted from smallest to biggest, and it's got to be the lower limit for each category. Now we're going to highlight all the way over to column 5. We do not need that column. That just helps us when we're doing it manually or when we're trying to build the formula initially. So there's the table, comma, column index. That just tells VLOOKUP which one of the columns has the thing you want to go and get. So we're starting with 5 because we want to get cumulative tax from previous categories. I'm even going to close parentheses and Control Enter. So I see so far it's working. It went and got the right cumulative previous tax, F2. Now the rest of this gets a little bit dangerous because we're trying to build it all together. But When we're done, I'll show you a new trick for verifying that everything worked fine. Now we're going to copy that because we're going to use VLOOKUP a few times. So Control-C in edit mode. Now I'm looking at my note over here, plus open parentheses. There's taxable pay. Now I need to minus VLOOKUP 4, so I subtract Control-V. That 5 has to be edited, so it's a 4. Now that piece will go and get upper limit from the previous category. We have to make sure and put a close parentheses. Now notice that's orange. I need to make sure it's the same color as that one. So I close parentheses, and I can see they're both black. Now I need to multiply times VLOOKUP 3, Control-V. Very carefully, I'm going to change that 5 to a 3. Now, I'm going to Control-Enter, and it's looking like it's working, and I think it is. I want to make sure and add the round, because later when we get to our payroll table, we're going to use it in a subsequent calculation. So F2, I want to put the round just on that part. Inside the parentheses is an amount times a percentage that might have an extraneous decimal. Now I'm going to type my round and an open parentheses. I want to make sure that orange parentheses is still there for that little bit. And it is. Now I come to the very end. And with not my selection cursor, my I-beam cursor, I click, comma, 2. We're rounding to the penny. Now, we're rounding to the penny. Final income taxes that are paid are always rounded to the dollar. Some businesses might do that. I'm going to keep it rounded to the penny here. Close parentheses. If it was rounded to the dollar, we know we have to put a 0 there. Now Control-Enter. And that is our formula. Now, we can check this and step through each part of the calculation and verify that the numbers are the same as in our table. The way we're going to do that is I'm going to select that cell, go up to the Formulas ribbon tab over in Formula Auditing. I'm going to click on Evaluate Formula. Now I can step through this and watch the entire formula calculate, making sure each time one of the VLOOKUPs is evaluated that it's the correct number from the table. So now I'm going to click Evaluate or Enter. Enter, Enter. So it looks like VLOOKUP 5, that's the same number as there. Now it's going to go inside round. Enter. Now it's looking at the second VLOOKUP. Enter, Enter. So 1658, that's the correct amount. Now it's going to evaluate that entire amount. Enter. Wow, you can see there is, just from internally, Excel's calculating that there's a decimal way out there. Now Enter. Now it's going to get the third VLOOKUP. Enter, Enter. It got 0.24. I'm verifying. Sure enough, that is working. Enter, Enter, and Enter. There's the correct amount. And Escape. All right, so our first example here, this is definitely easier to do, especially with a tax table where they have the rule as the last column. But if we want to automate it, we need to use the max and a bunch of VLOOKUPs. Now, this was for single marital status, pay period weekly. Let's go look at a married example, PM married weekly. Ming Pham, there's the gross earnings, 4 allowances. Now, total allowances, if we're doing it longhand, and we have to say 4 times allowance for a week, and there we go. Taxable pay, I'm going to say gross minus total allowances and Enter. Now I can do Fed income tax. That's the lookup value. Look at that. I can just look at this rule. Federal income tax equals, there's all the taxes from the previous brackets, plus there is taxable pay, and I need to subtract from it, upper limit from the previous category, close parentheses, times the correct tax rate. All I did is read the formula and type it in. There it is, 6883. Now, taxable pay for the automatic method. We want to make our main calculation, which is gross pay minus, and we're going to calculate total allowances. There's the number of allowances times allowances for a single person for the week. We know there's a problem with that when gross pay goes down below total allowances. So our trick is to use the max function. And I'm going to take the maximum between whatever that calculates to, comma, and 0. So there's two numbers. Max will pick the biggest and enter. Federal income tax equals VL tab, lookup value. It's going to be our taxable pay, comma. Here's the entire married weekly table all the way to the 5th column, comma 5, close parentheses. Now I'm going to copy that. Control C, plus in parentheses. There's the taxable pay minus Control V. We got to go to VLOOKUP 4, close parentheses, times Control V. The tax rate is in the 3rd column. I changed that to a 3. Control Enter. That is working. I still need to add round. F2, very carefully after the plus sign, round. At the end with my I-beam cursor, comma 2, close parentheses. And there is our formula. We can test it. 55, that is working. 13,000, man, I'd love to make 13,000 in a week. Ming must be working at Goldman Sachs or something, trading for the week. I'm going to Control ZZ. All right, so we saw two examples, married and single, using by hand and automatic. Now we want to go over and look at our example, weekly payroll table, single. Now here's our employee payroll table. And what we've done is, because we have two different tax tables, one for single and one for married, these employees are only marital status single, and then over on a different sheet we have married. So what we'll do is, and we can go look at this other sheet, weekly payroll table married. It's set up exactly the same. So what we'll do is we'll create the formulas on the other sheet, then paste them here. And the only difference is there's some different numbers over here. But the structure of the template is exactly the same. So back over on weekly payroll table, we want to create our formulas. Here's the tax table. Here's the amount of an allowance for a single week, employees, gross pay, and allowances. Taxable pay equals gross pay as a relative cell reference minus number of allowances as a relative cell reference times, and I'm going to go all the way over here and get allowances for a single week, F4 to lock it. By the way, we don't have to round that. We are multiplying pennies times an integer, so we're not going to have a rounding problem. Control Enter, double click and send it down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. That's looking good. All right, cumulative tax from the previous category. Oh, look at this. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 different columns. I'm going to do 3 different VLOOKUPs, and then the Federal Income Tax Withholding. Equals VL tab, lookup value, taxable pay, comma. Here's the table, all 5 columns. I need to lock this using the F4 key, comma. This, column index 5, so I put a 5. Close parentheses. Now, before I enter it, I'm going to copy it in edit mode, Control C. And I'm going to use Tab because I want to enter the formula and move to the right. F2, Control V. I need to get upper limit from column 4, so I'm going to change it to a 4. Tab, Control V, F2, and I'm going to change this to a 3. And enter. Now I'm going to highlight all 3 and double click and send it down. Uh-oh, I have a problem here. First, I'm going to go down to the bottom and hit F2. Okay, it's not with relative cell reference and table. All of these should be the same. So F2, it's looking good. F2, looking good. What's going on here? Oh, look at that. There's that employee who has gross pay less than the total amount of the allowance. So I have to come up and amend this. I just forgot. F2. Remember, I need to take the max of taxable pay or 0. So right after the equal sign, I'm going to say max. There's number 1. That's just the formula. Comma, 0, close parentheses. Now, that'll come out less than 0, 0, or positive. For all 3 cases, Max will calculate the correct taxable pay. Control Enter, double click, and send it down. And there we go. All right, so we have our 3 pieces from our lookup table. Now we can create our federal income tax formula. Equals, we need cumulative tax from previous bracket plus, in parentheses, there's taxable pay, minus upper limit from the previous category, close parentheses, times, there's my tax rate. I remember I have to round, so after the plus, I'm going to round, open parentheses, comma, 2, close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. That is looking good. Now, net pay equals, it is the gross pay minus so many steps to get our federal income tax withholding. But there, and this is just net pay just after taking out federal income taxes. We didn't do any of the taxes we did the last video. Double click and send it down. Go to the last cell and hit F2. And as one last approach to mashing it all together, I'm taking this formula, Control C, Escape, and I'm going to paste it here. Oops, I forgot the equal sign, so I put my cursor before the E and type an equal sign. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to come over here and copy this in edit mode, Control C, Escape, put it in edit mode. All right, the blue one is column 5, so Control V. That's right. The double click, the lavender or purple one, that's column 4. Control V. Now, very carefully, I'm going to change that 5 to a 4. Now, that G12 is column 3. Double click, Control V. Change it to column 3. And that will work. Control Enter. Double click and send it down. Oh, there's nothing to the left, to the right, or below, so I have to manually copy it down. Go to the last cell, hit F2, and Enter. Now, what do we do about over here, weekly payroll table for married? Well, guess what? We were smart. We set up this template exactly the same as this one. Now, all of these formulas, notice this has relative cell references and absolute cell references. The VLOOKUP's totally the same, but we can copy this. And relative and absolute will be pointing to exactly the same place on the other sheet. So I'm going to copy all of these formulas. Control C, go over to weekly payroll, click in the upper left. And when I Control V, you've got to be kidding me. I can go to the last cell and hit F2. Wow, it got exactly the right cell references. I can check every one, and they are working. Even this huge one over here. All right, so that was a little fun with federal income tax and MAX and VLOOKUP. There are definitely some homework problems. There should be 4 homework problems and answers. All right, so in this video, we talked about federal income tax calculations. We saw a few different examples, but the main formula is taxable pay. We saw how to use the MAX function. And continuing on video 33, where we did variable piecework and commission with lookup, here for federal income taxes, we used the same VLOOKUP 3 different times to retrieve the correct tax data to make our calculation from 3 different columns. We did our federal income tax formula and even mashed them all together. All right, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and sub, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excel is Fun, including next video, video number 36, where we'll do a comprehensive payroll table with all the different calculations we've seen. All right, we'll see you next video.